Hey there, comic fam. Welcome back to Climbing Comics. In today's sesh, we'll be talking about Amazing Spider-Man Annual #1. Hey there again, comic fam. Welcome back. So this week we'll be talking a little bit about one of the books that I've started to read because it's one of my 2020 goals. So this year I've decided to start collecting all of the Amazing Spider-Man annuals, and I started off by reading some of the books electronically, and I wanted to share a little bit about what I've read with Amazing Spider-Man Annual #1. It was an amazing surprise. So this is a 72-page giant special coming out, I believe, in October 1st, 1964 by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. So when it said there was 72 pages in the book, I was wondering, how are they going to fit 72 pages in a storyline when it's normally like 15 to 20? So I found out essentially that this book is broken up into 5 separate parts, right? First, the story of Amazing Spider-Man and the Sinister Six. Secondly, there were explanations, like one-page explanations of each of Spider-Man's enemies. So that's the second part. The third part were explanations of Spider-Man's powers. So I think they kind of dive deeper into kind of like what his powers are, his Spidey sense, his gadgets and whatnot. Next, fourth, is his cohort, right? So from the people he works with Betty Brant and J. Jonah Jameson, to his classmates, to his Aunt May and whatnot. And then fifth is essentially like a break of the fourth wall, essentially, where there's a comic strip, a 2-page comic strip of Stan Lee and Steve Ditko kind of going over how they work and how they come up with these stories. So those are the 5 parts of this story that I will be going over today. And let's start off. So with the story, you kind of start off with Doc Ock being brought to prison. And here you find out something pretty interesting. They were able to remove his kind of exoskeleton from his spine, so like the mechanical arms that are there. Here you realize that he has some sort of mental connection to those metal arms. So he kind of reaches out mentally to his arms, which they had put in this other room in the jail, and he essentially breaks himself free, right? So you see this as part of the first scene, and it kind of just sets it all up. Next, you see Spider-Man kind of flying around the city, and you see kind of these cameos, right? You see Thor flying through and kind of not noticing Spider-Man, but Spider-Man makes some sort of funny statement about him. And then you see a little advertisement of Thor's story and his comic book series. And then you see Peter Parker walking around being bullied by Flash Thompson, and essentially you see Doctor Strange walking around kind of in his astral form, right? And then Spider-Man and some of the people like walk through his astral form, and they're like, oh, this guy's actually really real. And they reference Doctor Strange coming out in Strange Tales. So there's lots of different cameos and kind of pointing to other storylines happening in Marvel here. So the first thing you see is Spider-Man kind of having his Spidey sense kind of flashing up, right? So he follows this guy into this alley, and the guy starts walking on top of this grate that's above the sewer line. Then all of a sudden the guy disappears, and then you find out and you realize this is Sandman. So he kind of just went down there, and I think at this point there's a gathering of the Sinister Six, or the first couple folks of the Sinister Six. At this point, Spidey goes home. He ends up seeing his Aunt May crying at home, holding a picture of his Uncle Ben. So Spidey gets all of these kind of memories of his Uncle Ben and how his Uncle Ben had died or killed by this burglar that Spidey could have stopped, but he didn't. So he starts doubting himself. He flies back, or like he swings back into the city, and then all of a sudden, with all of this self-doubt, he loses his power. So he loses his power, and then he's kind of jumping around, but he loses his power as he's swinging around, and he kind of falls and grabs onto this pole that's sticking out on the side of this building, and he's trying to like get himself to the actual wall. At the same time, you see the Fantastic Four flying, And they're like, oh, why is Spidey like messing around like this? All right, let's just leave him. And then they leave, right? So next, you kind of see that Dr. Octopus is essentially trying to pull together like what he's going to call the Sinister Six, right? So that's essentially composed of Electro, Kraven, Mysterio, Sandman, Vulture, and Doc Ock, right? So they're all in this room now, and they're trying to figure out how they could beat Spider-Man. So Doc Ock is like, all right, we all have almost beat Spider-Man, but combined, we definitely could beat Spider-Man. So I have this great idea. Let's do this. Let's do this together. And then you have people like Kraven and Sandman saying, no, I could still take him on my own. Like I could take him on my own. And then you're like, wait, what? Aren't you guys supposed to get together to fight them all at the same time? But I guess to appease the whole crowd, Doc Ock is like, all right, that's okay. Here's a hat with all these numbers in it. Everyone choose a number, and I'll make it so that we fight them one by one. Already a bad idea. But by fighting him one by one, and I'll choose a place for you to fight him that'll take advantage of your abilities and put Spidey at a disadvantage. And then, so there are people like Electro, who's like first, and he's like, he won't get past me. And then, so after this, they kind of start executing the plan, right? Because Doc Ock is like, all right, how do we get Spidey to even, start fighting us? So essentially what happens is that since Peter Parker had lost his powers, he's still kind of sad because of his Uncle Ben's passing, his Aunt May being sad about it. He kind of like, sullenly walks to school. And then for some reason he's not in class, so his Aunt May gets contacted and it's like, oh, where's Peter? And she doesn't know, the school doesn't know, so she leaves the house to go where he would be working, right? To go to the Daily Bugle. So on her way to the Daily Bugle, she sees Betty Brant outside, and Betty Brant and Aunt May are like, all right, let's go get some lunch. And at the same time, you see, it's funny, there's a car, you see Electro in his suit, and you see Sandman as well. And then they're like, all right, first step one to execute this, to get this thing happening is kidnap Betty Brant. But since Betty Brant was with Aunt May, they kidnapped them both. They put them in this, what looks like to be a hotel suite. And in this hotel suite is, they just put him sitting on the couch. It's very comfortable. And Doc Ock comes out and he's like, all right, ladies, I just have to, hold you here for now because we're trying to do something with Spider-Man. Do you guys want some cake or some tea? And then so he's very cordial to Aunt May and Betty Brant. And it's kind of funny because Aunt May starts kind of having a little bit of a liking to Doc Ock because she's like, oh, this guy's very well spoken. He's just like just doing his thing and he's treating us very nicely. So there you go. So step one is done. They've got Betty Brant and they know that Spider-Man will try to save Betty Brant. So what happens here is Vulture goes to J. Jonah Jameson's window and is like, all right, I want you to spread out in the news that we want to get Spidey, or somehow figure out or call Spidey to say that we've taken Betty Brant and this random Aunt May woman. And then at that same time, Peter Parker is in the room and he's like, okay, well, now I know. And so you see J. Jonah Jameson calling the operator. He's like, how do you get in contact with the Avengers or Fantastic Four? And then so he calls the Fantastic Four and he's like, where's Spider-Man? And they're like, I don't know. And then the Fantastic Four call the Avengers, and Captain America picks up this phone, and it's like this huge TV screen. And Captain America's like, well, all the Avengers are gone, and I don't even know who Spider-Man is. Next scene, you kind of see the Human Torch making like a sign out in the sky with all of his flames in front of where the X-Men are training. And outside this window, you kind of see like a little bit of like words scribbled out. And then, but Professor X is like, continue your training. Don't worry about that. So there's all of these like little things that happen. But essentially, Peter Parker knows that he has to go to step one, the power plant. And he's like, all right, let me go here. And he's like, I don't have powers, but let's see what happens. So he goes to the power plant, and Electro's there, and he's like, all right, Spidey, you have to beat me in order to get the clue to the next, to where you need to go next. And then if you find all the clues, you'll be able to get Betty Brant and Aunt May back. So Spidey is kind of doubtful of himself because he doesn't see what's happening in terms of his power. But once Electro kind of shoots him, Spidey, because he's like, all right, I'm smart, I'll ground myself by hooking up this wire to my suit. So he gets shocked, but then it gets grounded, and then he's not affected at all. But his body is able to react quickly by dodging this electric shock. And he's like, oh, I've actually had my powers this whole time. Okay. So what's cool is you get this one-page spread where Spidey is kind of punching or kicking Electro. And it takes up the whole panel. I was like, oh, this is really cool. It kind of reminds me of the cards of where they kind of show action scenes and whatnot. So after he beats him, he gets this little paper card, and he's like, all right, this is the next place I need to go to, this World's Fair place. So he goes to the World's Fair place, and then apparently Kraven is there with his a couple tigers. And then so they start fighting, and then they all attack him at the same time, the tigers and Kraven. And before they even know it, it's funny because Spider-Man reaches into Kraven's pocket and pulls this paper slip and was like, all right, this is all I need. I don't need to fight you anymore. So then he leaves. Then he essentially kind of goes to the next spot where it's Mysterio. And Mysterio had created these androids or robots that have all the powers of the X-Men. And then he kind of tricks Spidey to walking into his trap. So Android Cyclops starts kind of eye beaming Spidey, and he's like, oh, I think this is not right. So he starts fighting these not animatronic, but these kind of robot X-Men, and he realizes that this is Kraven. So with his Spidey sense, he could kind of tell where Kraven is behind one of these random walls, and then he punches through, and he punches Mysterio in his that glass dome thing. This is pretty cool. After this, he gets his card. He goes to Sandman. Sandman fights him in this random this random, I think it's a metal floor or metal area. And then all that was this room that kind of surrounds both him and Spider-Man. So him and Spider-Man are fighting in this room, and then Sandman closes the door. And then he closes the door, and it's airtight. So he's like, all right, Spidey, you won't be able to leave, and I'll be able to beat you. But for some reason, this whole thing is hermetically sealed. So Sandman loses breath, and apparently Spider-Man's lung capacity is higher because that's part of his Spidey powers. Yeah, so that's something new. So after this, he beats Sandman, and next up is Vulture, right? He's fighting on top of a building. Vulture's like, all right, last time I beat you, it wasn't a fair fight. You have to fight me without your web shooters. And then Spider-Man's like, okay, I'll take off my web shooters if that means that you won't give me the location that I need to go next. And then so he takes off his web shooters. The Vulture throws an oil slick on underneath Spider-Man's feet, and then he starts slipping, but he's able to kind of catch himself on the wall. He then lassos the Vulture with his webbing, and he eventually beats him. So next up is Doc Ock. So they're at this castle, this random castle in New York. And then so he goes to the castle, and he starts fighting Spidey, but he puts Spidey in this water tank. And it's kind of cool because the one-page scene is Doc Ock in water, with his kind of scuba mask, and then you kind of see his metal limbs. So he's like an octopus, right, in water, and apparently this is his advantage. But Spidey squirts out all of his webbing, and it's this webbing that looks kind of like the kelp forest in water, right? So then Doc Ock gets stuck here, right? So he's not able to escape the webbing. So soon after this, he leaves, and he's able to save Betty Brant and Aunt May. And then Aunt May is like, oh, should we say bye to Doc Ock? Should we say thanks for his hospitality? And then I'm just like, okay, Aunt May is a very interesting woman. So at this point, Spider-Man's like, all right, guys, wait here. I've called the police. They'll help you, and then they'll capture all of these bad guys. And then so the next scene is you see Betty Brant with Aunt May at home, and Aunt May is just only upset that she missed her show, the Beverly Hillbillies. So that was, yeah, Aunt May is very interesting, is what I'm starting to realize. So at the very last scene, you see Spidey, saving the day, and you see all of the Sinister Six sitting in a jail cell, like all sad. And in my head, I'm like, couldn't Sandman just leave? So it's kind of a fun scene where you kind of go over like all of those interactions with all of the Sinister Six as well as Spidey. So that's part one. Part two is Spider-Man's enemies, where you see these one-page screens of like the burglar, the one that killed his uncle, Chameleon, he appeared in ASM I, and then Vulture, other characters that are not as popular in today's Spidey universe, like the Tinkerer or the Living Brain. But then they give some background to people like Electro, the Enforcers, Mysterio, and Green Goblin, and Kraven and whatnot. So that's kind of pretty cool because they show when they appeared in the Spider-Man issue list, as well as where like he appears and what their powers are essentially, and a little bit backstory. So the third thing is Spider-Man's powers. And this is one of the things that I came to realize is pretty cool because I didn't realize this before, where they show him like essentially doing a deadlift with a whole bunch of weight on it. And behind him, you see Thor, you see Hulk, and you see the Thing. And what they say is Spider-Man is the only people stronger than Spider-Man are these three characters. So you're like, wow, Spider-Man's really strong, or they've made him really strong. And they explicitly say, but he's still a teenager, so we haven't even really seen his full strength yet. So that's pretty cool. Outside of that, they talk about how he has his webbings, how there's like different forms of his webbings that he could shoot out. They talk about his Spidey sense. They talk about how he could stick on walls, his agility, essentially like all of these different things that he could do with his powers. Like he could make shields, he could make rafts with his webbing. His webbing could come out as strings, or they could come out as a spray, or they could come out as liquid. So there's different uses for them. So there's a lot of different background as to Spider-Man and showing how intelligent Peter Parker is because he's making these web shooters. Outside of that, he has... the fourth thing is Spider-Man's cohort. So there's this thing called Heels and Heartthrobs. So you see J. Jonah Jameson and Betty Brant. Betty Brant completely ignoring J. Jonah while she's on the phone with Peter Parker. And so that's one thing. So even before Mary Jane and Gwen Stacy, Betty Brant was Peter Parker's first love interest, I guess. After this, you kind of see some background on his classmates and kind of some backgrounds on his house, right? It's pretty interesting because I don't know if you guys have seen this. There's this book series called, I believe it's called like Look Inside Cross Sections, right? So the book essentially makes a cross section of a certain picture. For example, the first one I totally remember is like this boat, right? So then they show a cross section of the boat where like you kind of see what each room looks like, what each of them are, like the steam room, the engine room, like all the living quarters and whatnot. Star Wars has this too, where they show like the Millennium Falcon or Star Destroyers and like what's on each level and whatnot. And they do kind of the same thing to Peter Parker's house, where they kind of show where he enters in from the attic into his room, into the living room and whatnot. The very last thing was very interesting to me, the fifth thing. So this is a 2-page spread of Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, and then it's breaking the fourth wall. It's them as characters, and then Steve Ditko drawing the characters, Stan Lee coming up with the characters. So you see the first panel, Stan waking up, oh, I have this great idea. Let me call Steve, and let me like bounce these ideas off of him. So he's like, all right, Steve, we got this idea. You need to draw this for me. So they have their like friendly banter back and forth, but you can kind of see that there's a little bit of angst in some of these messages because Stan Lee essentially is like, who's the first person that gave you a job? Who's the first person that drew, like taught you how to draw and bought you your first pair of shoes? I was like, wow, that's that's something. And then you see a lot of kind of that banter back and forth, and Steve just wanting to do his job. So when Steve is done drawing or getting close to done drawing, he essentially talks to the assistant and is like, all right, if Stan calls, tell him I was drafted or something and I'm not available. And so it's pretty funny because like of their back and forth, right? So just as he finishes the last panel of the issue that he's working on, you see Stan wake up and he's like, I have another great idea. Let me call Steve. And then so that's kind of how the last thing goes, right? So it's pretty fun to see that banter. So from this book, I've come to appreciate a lot more of, the take of how to bring more people into the story, storyline, right? Just to be able to, 1, go over a story, 2, go over like, villains, 3, go over like Spidey's powers, 4, go over who does Spidey talk to and who does he like, have relationships with. And then that 5th thing, to bring Stan and Steve into the comic itself, right? You see those characters of people that they've drawn kind of like also intermingling with the characters that of themselves that they drew in these panels. That it's actually a really fun and just a very, eclectic book in terms of the ideas that they've had and how to convey, history in a fun manner to all of the readers. So I definitely think that don't skip out on reading annuals. They're pretty fun. So from my comic journey to yours, don't be afraid to take that unbeaten path in your comic book collection, because there are some books out there that might provide some more context that's might be out of the normal lineage of storyline. So keep reading. Thanks. Bye.